law enforcement officials have provided new information regarding the abduction investigation of Nancy Guthrie, the mother of Today show co-anchor Savannah Guthrie. As nearly 2 weeks passed since Nancy Guthrie vanished, the intensity surrounding the case continued to grow. Nancy was widely known as a loving mother, a loyal friend, and an 84-year-old grandmother who had spent more than 5 decades living a peaceful, private life in Tucson's Catalina foothills. She cherished her privacy, followed consistent daily routines, and faithfully attended church, met with friends, and hosted family dinners. Then, during the early morning hours of February 1st, she disappeared without warning. Her doorbell camera suddenly stopped functioning. A masked person was captured on footage, and blood was later discovered on her doorstep. Those elements immediately prompted disturbing questions about what had unfolded in that narrow span of time. What had begun as a quiet winter night quickly escalated into a case drawing national attention, especially after a single piece of evidence discovered miles away dramatically shifted the direction of the investigation. Nancy Guthrie had never lived a life meant for headlines. She was not a celebrity and did not seek public recognition. She did not reside behind high gates or cut herself off from society. Rather, she was an elderly mother and grandmother who had built a stable and grounded life in the Catalina foothills outside Tucson for more than 50 years. Born Nancy Long in Kentucky, she came of age during a period when women were often expected to pursue their ambitions quietly and steadily. That quiet determination shaped the life she created. She was composed, resilient, and steady in her approach to both family and career. In 1988, when her husband died unexpectedly, her world was abruptly divided. While navigating her own grief, she helped her children through theirs. At the same time, she stepped further into professional life, eventually establishing a communications career at the University of Arizona. Colleagues remembered her as calm, thoughtful, and deeply respected. She did not chase praise, but she naturally commanded admiration. She stood up for programs she believed in, mobilized support when funding was threatened, and continued her work without seeking recognition. At home, she demonstrated the same strength. She cared for her aging mother and opened a guest house on her property to her brother, who had Down syndrome. Among friends, she earned a reputation as someone who arrived quietly during difficult times, listened attentively, reflected carefully, and remained steadfast. Although age brought physical changes, those who knew Nancy insisted her intellect remained sharp. A pacemaker helped regulate her heart, and daily medication was no longer optional. She used a cane to move comfortably across gravel driveways, and powerful hearing aids compensated for the hearing loss time had caused. Despite these adjustments, her mind remained active. She followed current events closely, read extensively, and regularly wrote in her journal while sitting on her patio, surrounded by the desert air. Only days before her disappearance, she had been laughing at her mahjong table, playing with her usual strategic focus. She celebrated her birthday with close friends, enjoying shrimp and grits along with fresh beignets. She had confirmed plans to watch a church service that upcoming Sunday, just as she had done countless times before. There was no sign of fear, no suggestion that she felt unsafe. She continued to participate in social gatherings and maintained her routines without hesitation. While her youngest daughter, Savannah Guthrie, is recognized nationwide as a co-anchor of NBC's Today Show, Nancy herself avoided publicity. Neighbors described her as someone who deeply valued her privacy. Her low profile, welcoming home sat back from the road, surrounded by cactus and desert brush. Inside were shelves of books, shared meals, and friendships that had lasted decades. It was difficult to imagine that this steady and familiar home would soon become the focal point of a nationwide criminal investigation. January 30 first appeared entirely ordinary. Nancy spent the evening having dinner with family. She drove home safely, and her garage door opened and closed as it always did. Nothing seemed unusual. There were no raised voices, no visible disturbances, and no signs of trouble. That calm evening would later be recognized as the final moment of normal life before everything changed. No alarms sounded. No warnings were issued. Only silence followed. Shortly after 2 a.m., troubling discoveries began to surface. Her phone was left behind inside the house. Her daily medication remained untouched. Blood was found on tile near the entrance. In a single night, a lifetime of routine gave way to chaos. The woman who had been a source of stability for so many suddenly became the center of an agonizing mystery. What had occurred during the early hours of February 1st to transform her quiet residence into a crime scene? Earlier that evening, Nancy had shared dinner with her daughter Annie and her son-in-law. They spent several relaxed hours together, and she displayed no signs of anxiety or distress. Around 9:48 p.m., she returned to her home in the Catalina foothills. Her garage door opened and closed 2 minutes later, as her son-in-law remained outside long enough to confirm she had safely entered. That brief moment became the final confirmed sighting of Nancy. From the exterior, everything appeared undisturbed. No security alarms were triggered. No emergency calls were placed. The neighborhood remained peaceful. The timeline began to fracture in the early hours of February 1st. At 1:47 a.m., her front door camera was disconnected. Roughly 25 minutes afterward, a motion sensor on the property activated, yet no usable footage was retained. At 2:28 a.m., her pacemaker ceased communicating with her cell phone, which investigators later located inside the home. This detail strongly suggested that after that moment, she was no longer near her phone. That 40-minute window between 1:47 a.m. and 2:28 a.m. became the focal point of the investigation. By late morning on February 1st, concern grew among family members. Nancy failed to arrive at a friend's home to watch a church service she had previously arranged to attend. Her punctual and dependable nature made this absence highly unusual. Repeated calls and messages went unanswered. Shortly before noon, relatives went to her house. They discovered her car still parked outside. Inside the residence, her wallet was present, her daily medication had not been taken, and her hearing aids were left behind. Considering her medical needs, she would not have left without these essential items unless forced. Investigators later confirmed that blood discovered near the front porch belonged to Nancy, based on DNA testing. The doorbell camera mount was found empty, the device itself missing. Sheriff Chris Nanos stated that signs at the property indicated force and described the scene as troubling. Authorities quickly secured the home as a crime scene and launched a formal investigation into what appeared to be a possible abduction. Days later, officials released still images taken from the doorbell camera system before it was disabled. The black and white footage, captured in low light, showed a masked individual outside Nancy's residence during the early morning hours. The person wore gloves and carried a backpack. At one point, the individual raised a gloved hand to block the camera and appeared to use leaves in an attempt to obscure it. The suspect was estimated to stand between 5 feet 9 inches and 5 feet 10 inches tall, with an average build. The backpack was identified as an Ozark Trail hiker pack. The face was completely covered, making identification impossible. Although the actual abduction was not recorded, the timing of the footage aligned with the moment her pacemaker stopped communicating with her phone. Combined with the blood evidence and the removed camera hardware, investigators believed from early on that she had been forcibly taken. No neighbors reported hearing screams or signs of a struggle. No witnesses came forward from that morning. The investigation repeatedly returned to that critical 40-minute gap, the narrow span separating normalcy from nightmare. Approximately 24 hours after Nancy was officially reported missing, another development surfaced. A local television station received a message from someone claiming responsibility for the kidnapping. The sender demanded millions of dollars in Bitcoin in exchange for her safe return. Other media outlets reported receiving similarly structured messages, complete with deadlines and warnings not to involve law enforcement. However, no verifiable proof of life accompanied these demands. Authorities reviewed the communications carefully. The family acknowledged learning about them and requested direct contact, along with undeniable confirmation that Nancy was alive. as stated deadlines came and went without verified follow-up or release. Uncertainty deepened. Investigators did not confirm whether the messages were genuine or whether communication was ongoing. This left open the possibility that the ransom notes either reflected true motive or represented attempts to exploit the case's high profile. In response, Nancy's children addressed the public. Savannah Guthrie and her siblings recorded a video directed toward whoever was holding their mother. Reading from prepared notes, Savannah spoke in a composed but emotionally strained voice. She requested proof of life and emphasized that modern technology makes it possible to manipulate voices and images. The family needed certainty, she explained, and would only engage further if they were assured Nancy was alive. Days later, Savannah released another, shorter video. This time, she spoke without reading. She stated they had received a message, understood its contents, and urged the person responsible to return their mother. Observers speculated that negotiations might have taken place. At one stage, the family publicly indicated a willingness to pay, underscoring the seriousness of their intent. Each video demonstrated an emotional progression, shifting from structured demands for proof to open readiness to comply if necessary. As the second and third weeks unfolded, Savannah released yet another message, standing alone and speaking without visible notes. Her words were simple. It is never too late to do the right thing. She repeated the phrase, deliberately omitting any mention of money, deadlines, or specific demands. Instead, she appealed to conscience and expressed belief in the fundamental goodness of every person. Her delivery was calm, direct, and deeply personal. The shift suggested either a change in strategy or a breakdown in communication. The public watched as a daughter clung to hope despite mounting uncertainty. Deadlines expired. Silence persisted. No confirmed proof of life emerged. There were only appeals and waiting. Meanwhile, investigators worked tirelessly behind the scenes. Within days, the scope of the operation expanded dramatically. More than 30,000 calls, emails, and online tips were received from across Arizona and other states. Each had to be documented and evaluated. Some reports came from neighbors who noticed unfamiliar vehicles. Others came from viewers who recognized the backpack scene in released images. Many tips were vague or unrelated, but none were dismissed without review. Hundreds of deputies, detectives, and FBI agents were assigned to the case. Analysts processed digital submissions. Officers conducted interviews. Phone records were scrutinized. Surveillance footage from surrounding areas was collected and examined. The national spotlight increased potential leads, but also strained resources, as false or duplicate tips required verification. Investigators executed a federal warrant at a residence approximately 2 miles from Nancy's home. Multiple agency vehicles surrounded the property. Officers entered and exited for hours. A gray Range Rover located nearby was photographed, covered with a sheet, and towed for forensic analysis. Individuals connected to that location were questioned, and some were briefly detained. However, no arrests followed. Authorities later stated that at least one early person of interest was no longer considered a primary suspect, while emphasizing that no one had been formally cleared. Officials carefully avoided definitive statements that might hinder legal proceedings or restrict investigative flexibility. At the same time, law enforcement acknowledged that they were not operating under a single dominant theory. They were exploring several possibilities, including a burglary that escalated unexpectedly, a crime motivated by her daughter's national profile, ransom as the primary motive from the beginning, and other undisclosed scenarios. They described the situation as involving a myriad of theories and confirmed they were not limiting the investigation to one direction. This openness, while transparent, also highlighted the uncertainty. Weeks passed. Blood evidence had been identified. Surveillance images were public. Ransom communications had circulated. Yet no suspect had been named, and no clear motive confirmed. The case remained active, but closure felt distant. Phones continued ringing. Analysts worked long hours. Detectives retraced routes and re-examined evidence. Most leads dissolved under scrutiny, though some required deeper analysis. The case file grew thicker as time advanced. Then, nearly 2 miles from her residence, a single discovery shifted momentum. Search teams combing desert brush and roadside areas collected numerous gloves, many belonging to search personnel and easily explained. However, one glove found in a field near the road stood out. It closely resembled the glove worn by the masked figure captured in the doorbell footage, matching in color and material in the black and white images. While not definitive proof, the similarity justified comprehensive forensic testing in a case with limited physical evidence beyond the home. The glove underwent DNA testing. Early analysis revealed an unknown male DNA profile. Authorities confirmed it did not match Nancy or anyone in her immediate circle. This increased its investigative significance. Plans were made to run the DNA profile through CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system, which contains millions of profiles from prior cases and convicted offenders. A match could directly identify a suspect. If no match occurred, the profile would be retained for future comparison. Experts explained that the quality of DNA recovered is critical. Full samples, such as blood or saliva, typically produce complete profiles, whereas touch DNA from skin cells may result in partial profiles that are still potentially valuable. Even a partial profile, if strong enough, could link the glove to the masked individual. Investigators also explored the possibility of investigative genetic genealogy. This approach compares crime scene DNA to profiles voluntarily uploaded to public ancestry databases. Even if the perpetrator never submitted DNA personally, a relative might have, enabling analysts to locate distant familial connections, construct family trees, and narrow down potential suspects. Although this method can require time, it has resolved complex cases before. Given Nancy's advanced age and reliance on daily medication, urgency remained critical. Former law enforcement officials emphasized that in high-priority investigations, laboratory testing timelines can be accelerated to expedite results.